So I got around to watching Bel-Air on Peacock, and man, I should have knew something was up when they were like it's on Peacock, but whatever. Like it was bad, man. It was bad, and honestly, it's really the embodiment of why this whole culture of remakes is inherently flawed. Because the absolute best that they could have done was if they just recreated a product that we've already had for 30 years, and as for what they gave us. Honestly, disappointment doesn't even begin to describe how I feel. Like, I go as far to say as I'm disgusted at this perversion of an intellectual property that we grown to love over the course of what's been my entire life. Like, The Fresh Prince was the epitome of 90s culture, a culture that creates a sense of nostalgia in anyone who experiences it. And to take that and think you could recreate it with what we were given, that's tone deaf at best. And the biggest flaw was the characters. These characters aren't the Banks family, and you can't make them into them just because you give them the same names. Like, the only character who was treated with any integrity was Aunt Viv, but because of her role in the family and how far they missed the mark with everyone else, it still doesn't really do her justice. You feel me? Like, this show was so bad, it made me go back and rewatch a series I've seen in its entirety at least 10 times. Like, most episodes I've seen dozens of times, but even most obscure of episodes I've seen at least 5 to 10 times. And it was unnecessary because 3 episodes in of the actual Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, it becomes painfully obvious that these characters aren't the same people, and they're loosely based in name and physical frame, like, at best. And I understand this is a dramatic series. It's not a comedy. And as such, there are certain inherent aspects that aren't going to be the same. But that's the first problem, because anybody who knows the Fresh Prince knows that they tackled so many hard-hitting, real-life subjects, but they did it with grace and discretion in a way that made it palatable to an audience, which I think that's way more powerful than just shoving it down our throats in the least creative way imaginable. So now, I'm going to go character by character and beat by beat and explain how they failed at every level imaginable to bring the Banks family back. And I'll start with the hills that I'm not willing to die on. There's not very many of them. Like, I'm doing this to acknowledge that I'm not just criticizing for the sake of criticizing. These are serious character flaws, and you just can't do it if you actually understand the property that you're trying to recreate. So, as for the minor discretions that, like, I could live with, Uncle Phil isn't fat. Like, what? There's such a large aspect to his character. No pun intended. But it made him flawed in a way that was obvious. Like, not to say that being fat in itself is a flaw, but it's humanizing in a way that genuinely added to his character. Like, there was something you could see that could be used as a way to joke on a man as powerful as Philip Banks. But I won't go into detail on that because there are hills related to that subject that I'm willing to die on. His weight just isn't one of them. 2, Will's ears aren't that big. And I'd go as far to say that they were small. Like, it just doesn't feel right, man. It just doesn't feel right. And the last hill I'm not willing to die on, and this is kind of iffy, like, you might see me dead on the top of this hill. Like, I might be willing to die on this hill if you catch me on the right day. And that's that Ashley's 12 at the beginning and not 9. And they have a 15-year-old playing Ashley. So, like, a lot of her more, like, naive aspects wouldn't work the same way that it did originally. And I think that's why she wasn't as present early, because in the actual Fresh Prince, a lot of Ashley's characters surrounded around her being this sweet, well-behaved little girl. You feel me? It's like the naivety was such a big part of it. But that's it. Everything else I say, I'm willing to take to court and testify under oath. And I'll start with the characters. Everyone watching this or listening to this, whatever, probably wants me to talk about Carlton, because I think it's pretty much a consensus that was the worst remake of any character in any remake. But before I get to him, I feel like I need to talk about Hilary and Uncle Phil, so you could feel me on this character. Like, I need you to really understand where I'm coming from and see that, like, it's consistent problems, and he was just the culmination of doing everything wrong as it relates to them. But I'm going to get to him. Like, don't worry, I'm gonna get to Carlton. But last point. In a vacuum, this isn't a bad show. Like, I'd even go as far to say that this is a good show in a vacuum. The problem is that they took the intellectual property of the Fresh Prince, which we already know and love, and people watch, And these aren't the Banks. Like, regardless of how good of a production quality it is and all these things, you took something that existed already and that's not it. Okay. So back to Hilary. I'll start by saying Hilary's probably the only likable character in the show. Not that like I like her as Hilary Banks, but like I said, in a vacuum, she's probably the only character that had a major role that wasn't insufferable. But the issue is, she was not Hilary Banks. Like, at her core. Like, Hilary's vastly more self-absorbed and concerned with her own personal and social life than this Hilary. You feel me? And that's apparent in the difference in how they greeted Will from the beginning. Like, in the actual Fresh Prince, the introduction to Hilary went like this.
Dad, I need $300.
Hilary, your cousin Will is here.
Hi. Dad, I need $300.
And this $300, it was for a hat. For a trip that she was taking to save the environment. That was obviously horrible for the environment. Now, I'm not going to be willfully obtuse and not acknowledge that that scene was done for comedic effect. And this is not a comedy, but you have to be equally willfully obtuse to not acknowledge that her first time on screen was her first piece of character development. And that's not the same character that would introduce him to her 3,000 active online Instagram live followers, then take him and have a genuine heartfelt conversation and she goes to style him while complimenting him how he looks at the end. Like, that's not the same person. And the fact that they tried to make a joke to explain why Carlton had a suit Will's size was just in bad taste. But that's a critique for a different section. Hilary was like, she in Bel-Air, she was very self-aware and ambitious and conscious of creating her own success outside of what's being handed to her by mommy and daddy. Like, these are positive characteristics, but they aren't Hilary. Like, we were already introduced to Hilary and that's not her. And it makes me think back to the episode of The Fresh Prince where Hilary decided she wanted to be a caterer and got a job catering a bar mitzvah. Like, that was such a powerful moment of like character development for Hilary, and it signified so much growth in a character that we had already felt like we'd known because it was out of character for her, but it was still consistent with the trajectory of her particular character. And even in this endeavor, like of her trying to do her own professional thing, she was embarrassed to be seen serving and she went and hid in the closet. Not only that, but like she convinced Will to pass up on a date that he was like all excited about. And then Jeffrey came in the closet and he gave her probably one of the like most heartfelt, best TV sitcom dad moments. And she came out and knocked it out the park. And that had that effect because it started from the original scene that I mentioned before. And then it built its way up to something that mattered to us because it was, like I say, growth. Whereas this ambitious, non-airheaded, non-celebrity obsessed version of Hilary we were given, like, she already has her own personal success. She's moving forward in a direction she's already confident in. And if we saw her do that exact same thing, our only takeaway would be like, why is she even concerned with that? Like, how could she be so childish as to hide in the closet? Because we weren't introduced to that original Hilary that made sense for. And that was just such a big moment for Hilary. Therefore, like, her whole growth trajectory it's supposed to be different. So you can't introduce a character as the same thing that's on a completely different trajectory. But like I said, Hilary was probably the only like bearable character. She was the only likable character in the show. So I can kind of overlook that. You feel me? But Uncle Phil, gosh, I wish he was fat. Like, I really wish he was fat. But like, more importantly, I think we as an audience are like intelligent enough to understand that he's an important, strong, powerful individual without him being this scouring, bitter, Jesus-like figure. Like, we didn't look at him as less than just because in The Fresh Prince he was vastly more humble. Like, first things first, they ruined the whole dynamic by having him pull strings to get Will out of jail prior to him moving to Bel-Air. It was unnecessary. And the fact that he threw it in Will's face, even though Will didn't fucking ask him to do that, it was childish and it made him unlikable, which, oh my God, this man was so unlikable. Like, he was such an unlikable fucking character. And a lot of that could be attributed to story beats, you feel me? Like, the original writers were clearly more concerned with first impressions because they fucking matter to the audience, you feel me? And who we're gonna root for, who we're gonna get invested in, all that stuff. In the original Fresh Prince, his first one-on-one conversation was with his wife, you feel me? And it was after Will poked a little bit of fun at him, but it wasn't contingent on that. He just let it slide off because he was painted to be a very he was painted from the beginning as a human being, like to have a personality, a sense of humor, like how any one of us would want our dads to be. And in his conversation with Aunt Viv about Will, she humbled him when he tried to criticize her in a personable way that didn't make us instantly look at him as this overly judgmental and self-righteous person. And it also established that he was more than just the end product that we now see in front of us. Like, that was established consistently and very early, you feel me? Like, I literally wanted to throw up watching him throw it in Will's face that he got him out of prison and talked to him like he was unintelligent or less than a human being. Like, the conversation they had after Will tried to run away, it would have functioned far better as a first conversation. Particularly the fact that after he asked him if he cared if he lived or died, his response was, "I do." Before mentioning his mother, Aunt Viv, or anyone else in the house. But at that point, he was climbing out of a hole he'd already dug with their initial interaction, which that was our first impression of the character, you feel me? Like, in The Fresh Prince, in episode 1, you could already see Will getting acclimated, kicking his feet up, telling telling Jeffrey to go make some hot cocoa for him. Or even in the opening sequence, like, this might be alright, you feel me? Whereas in Bel-Air, he wanted to run away, and aside from the home drama, we as an audience could clearly see why he wouldn't want to be there. They made it out to be a punishment when it was really supposed to be like what was good for him, you feel me? Not to mention, in the original Fresh Prince, at the dinner party for his coworkers, like, you could see Uncle Phil was like visibly panicked and trying to hold it together. Plus, his coworkers didn't make like snarky judgmental comments at the end, but that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is, you could see that Uncle Phil was like, he was genuinely panicked. You feel me? Was that comedic? Yes. Was it also humanizing? Also yes. Like, thus far in The Fresh Prince, Uncle Phil hadn't at any point been made out to look like this omniscient, all-knowing, right, hard-ass figure. You feel me? Like, and Is that how someone in his position probably would come off? Like, probably yes. But we already have the fucking character. Like, the character already exists, and that's not how he was. So thusly, when him and Will finally had their altercation, if you want to call it that, at the end of the first episode, him being stern didn't take away from him being a human and being understanding as a character, you feel me? Not to mention, Will was way more pompous and obnoxious, not, breaking down in tears. And he deserved to be spoken to the way that he was spoken to. And even in that, he didn't seem angry or fed up, like, why the fuck do you even want this kid around if you're gonna act like that, you feel me? He seemed tired. And the word he used for Will's, like, far more outlandish antics at the party, you feel me, in the dinner, he was embarrassed. Like, he was a human being. He was a dad. And also, even in that, they showed that he wasn't this all-knowing person. Like, when he piped him down for thinking he had him all figured out, like when Uncle Phil piped Will down for Will thinking that he had Uncle Phil all figured out. And he explained for the second time in the show some of his roots, you feel me? Like, you should get to know people instead of thinking you have them all figured out. Just for him to dismiss Will before he even got a chance to explain the type of person he was and then leave. Like, and then after that, you see Will playing the piano, and then you see Uncle Phil come back in the screen, and Will can't see him, but the camera pans into it, so we as the audience could see him, and we could see it as a way of him acknowledging that he noticed maybe he should have taken his own advice. And that was such a beautiful, powerful moment. And I'm sick they scrapped it for this totalitarian, always right dictator figure that they introduced Uncle Phil as in his first conversation with Will. Like, I don't understand why they felt like that was a good direction to go with that. That being said, fucking Carlton. Carlton, that fucking dweeb. Like, that cocky, confrontational bastard. That, like, jealous, drug-addicted cuck. Like, the fucking token nigger Uncle Tom for the lacrosse team and his band of self-righteous, socially unaware, equally confrontational, bigoted chads. Like, I hated his character. I hated everything about it. Will walked in and saw him doing drugs, and nobody felt that. Not a single person said, I like Carlton, but you know what he needs to really make his character pop? A drug addiction and temper. And I say this in no way to speak down on any person with a drug addiction or anything like that. I say this to say we already had the character, and it was not him. And I wanted to mention Hilary first because she had a mild case of this problem, but like, she was still a likable character. But I just wanted to establish a pattern and already get you to understand how this could be problematic for a character. But like, Carlton was also an airheaded character in the original Fresh Prince. Like, his nature, he was very airheaded. And that made his character so much more digestible to black people. Like, although he had so heavily conformed to his surroundings of rich, affluent white people, like it was, you could still like him because of that airheaded nature to it. Like, if you told me Carlton didn't know the problems poor or like not rich black people face, like, I could believe you. And that's why it wasn't that hard to like him, because ignorance is easier to forgive and grow to love than like an understanding that comes with just pure defiance. From his initial interaction, throwing it in Will's face that he was wearing a $500 suit and that he was wearing it slightly wrong, to how aggressively he defended his white friend to say nigga, to having an ex and being willing to push Will in a fucking pool for flirting with her. Like, it really had me thinking, did people who wrote this shit actually watch every episode? You feel me? Like, did they actually watch every episode? I don't think that was too much to ask of them. I've watched every episode multiple times, as I said. You feel me? And I particularly want to reference the fraternity episode where they tried to tell Carlton he wasn't black enough and he set him straight.
What? Why?
Look, I don't know, man. Come on, just let's go.
How dare you not take Will? He's full of potential.
That's why we want him. It's you we don't want.
Me? But I did everything. I cooked, I cleaned, I hand washed the toilets.
Everything your butler does for you. I'm not accepting no prep school, Bel-Air bred sellout into my fraternity. Homie, you can stop all that.
No, wait, Will. I got this one. You think I'm a sellout. Why? Because I live in a big house or I dress a certain way? Or maybe it's because I like Barry Manilow.
He been Barry White, y'all.
Being black isn't what I'm trying to be, it's what I am. I'm running the same race and jumping the same hurdles you are, so why are you tripping me up? You said we need to stick together, but you don't even know what that means. If you ask me, you're the real sellout.
That was different than Hilary's moment that I mentioned earlier with her catering business, because it wasn't supposed to be understood as a moment of growth. That was a moment of revelation. So what's the difference? Well, with Hilary, she was a certain way, and we were to understand that she's now grown from that to how she is now, and it's supposed to be different. However, with Carlton, we were made to understand that he's been that way already. Like, he's already had these understandings, and it's just now being brought to our attention because it was relevant. In a way that ties the character in a nice bow, and it brings new light to some of the things that we probably didn't understand about him before. Things in the dark, they exist already. So when you bring light to something, you're not making something new. You're just showing it. You feel me? Not even to mention his aspects of growth, like when he had to find out the hard way that him being a black man interacting with the police, he would be treated a certain way. Like, that was where we saw growth. But in him taking pride for himself as a black man, that wasn't showing us growth. It was giving us understanding. You feel me? In Bel-Air, when Will confronted him about letting his friend say the N-word around him while being like all pleasant about it and cool, his response was premeditated. Like, that was something he had thought about before and come to a conclusion that was defiant to how black people feel about the subject, typically. That's not in line with why Carlton carries himself the way he does. Like, his motivations weren't a lack of knowing. It was knowing and aligning with the other side. And this whole drug thing, I just want to repeat, this isn't a critique on people who struggle with drugs or people who choose to do them socially or anything like this. This is a critique that this is not the character that he was supposed to be portraying. Like, you could change the genre, mood, and tone, but you're ruining the IP at the point where you have people who are supposed to be like the same characters not be those characters. It's as if they didn't attack drug use in an episode of The Fresh Prince, where Carlton tried drugs and ended up in the hospital like he clearly had not been a drug user. And the change in tone doesn't account for this, because although it was a funny episode, this episode particularly, the scene where it was addressed, it was a very serious scene. Like, did they really say, okay, boom, we'll have Carlton, but on drugs? Like, who greenlit that shit? It's the same with Carlton's first relationship and him losing his virginity. Like, you can't just have these character shells but develop differently, because it puts them on a whole different trajectory, and it makes it a different show at that point. Also, it's just coming to me. Where the hell did this Carlton Will beef come from? And why did it monopolize so much of the first episode? Like, the episode where we were introduced to their versions of these characters? Like, why did it monopolize them? In the original, when they were introduced to each other, like, they were very clearly different people. You feel me? They had different perspectives, but they weren't at odds. The worst thing you could say is Will saw himself as Carlton and screamed. Maybe a little bit of, you feel me, subtle poking at him, but it wasn't, they didn't have beef, you feel me? But dog, episode 1 ended with Will punching Carlton in the face in a moment that was supposed to be cathartic for the audience. What the fuck am I even talking about? Like, what? That's disingenuous to the characters on so many levels. Will punched Carlton in the face and the audience felt like he deserved it. Like, that's the direction y'all want to go with this thing? Y'all really thought that was the best direction. This was based on the Fresh Prince in the way that the Blair Witch Project was based on a true story. Like, Carlton was just too extremely conscious of how much of a prick he was and too okay with it. And bro, Carlton was doing drugs in the Banks mansion. Like, I'm still baffled by that. Like, my mom was so sad watching that. She was so sad watching Carlton in general. And they looked like they were going to try to redeem him by saying, oh, you probably don't know what he's been through. But then they don't say what he's been through. They just cut away to him doing drugs with his friend, then cut back to Will and Lisa dirty dancing out in the open by the pool before the physical confrontation between Will and Carlton that ended episode 1. Like, I could go on for days about why I hate Carlton, but I think it begins to devolve into just built-in issues with the show on the whole. Like, you could very clearly see a money-driven studio hand manipulating this in a way that if it was present in the original, you couldn't see it. Shit like Jazz picking Will up from the airport, or no fourth wall breaks, or Jeffrey not being all spicy, you feel me? To Will meeting Lisa episode 1 and already adapting her as a love interest. Actually, I do want to delve a little bit into that. Will was a tall, attractive, goofy, funny, fun-loving star of the high school basketball team. Now, if you've ever been to high school, then you know that means he gets bitches. It comes with the territory. So, Will was a ladies' man in the original Fresh Prince. Like, but that only lasts so long before it gets old, you feel me? The jokes start to get dry. So later on in the series, they had to introduce Lisa as a real relationship for Will as his character was maturing. You take so much out of his character as well as their relationship by introducing her as the only girl he's pursuing episode 1. Not to mention, they was flirting first quarter, even though she used to date his cousin, and she met Will at a function thrown by his cousin's family at his cousin's family's house. That just makes the character seem trifling, and it devalues the whole relationship even more than you're devaluing it by making it happen on episode 1. But I don't want to talk about Lisa too much, because what was Lisa's character as it like relates to the actual canon of the Fresh Prince? Like, other than the girl named Lisa and Will's love interest, they didn't even try to have any consistency with the character. And I'm not gonna stress myself talking about that, because that was an obvious, like, they just mailed that one in. One little disagreement I had with the direction of how they decided to do things, and I feel like it exasperates all the other issues at this point. Like, I'm off characters. I'm just more so talking about the show. Is that I don't think they went about showing the backstory the right way. Like, I don't think they should have shown it first. And I know that was a lot of the draw of the show, and some people probably really enjoyed it, but like, just hear me out. In the original Fresh Prince, the story was told very, like, lighthearted in a music video during the intro sequence, that it wouldn't have worked in a serious tone like how they were trying to establish with this show. But it wasn't an introduction to the character. It was more so an introduction to the story. And it lasted less than 2 minutes, even in the extended cut. So, like, what does that result in? Our introduction to who Will Smith was as a character and the beginning of any, like, real emotional connection, it began when he was beating on the door singing Back to Life. 5 seconds later, we were introduced to Jeffrey. But, like, they didn't have no stupid-ass confrontation. And you can even say we were simultaneously introduced to Jeffrey as Will, if you count, like, his demeanor as he went to answer the door, and I personally do. About 15 seconds later, we were introduced to Aunt Viv. And then right after, we were introduced to Uncle Phil, followed by Ashley. Very shortly after that, like within the first minute of meeting Will, we met other main characters and we began to like grow an attachment to them. So aside from the fact that the characters, like they were a lot more likable people, why does that matter? Well, because when you take 10 minutes introducing us to Will before any other main characters, we begin to build an attachment to him already. Like, he's likable. The character's likable. We start to like him. You feel me? And we already see the type of person he was. Like, he was very averse to being given a gun, but he felt like he needed it. And he only pulled it when he seen his close friend getting stomped out crying for help. And he shot a warning shot instead of like killing somebody. Like, we get attached to him, and we don't meet any other characters for a while this attachment's being like built. And that results in us being even more emotionally attached to him than to the other characters. So now you take that we're more emotionally attached to him and add that when we first meet the other characters, they're so rude to him. That makes them being dislikable characters, which, as I've already established, is a separate issue within itself, seem 10 times worse. And I personally think they should have started the show with him arriving at the house the same way, just had like implications that some shit happened. Like, they should briefly mention it, and then in a later episode they should have a flashback to what went down, like kind of like episode 8 of Ozark, where you kind of get that he had been working with this guy for a while and everything, but you don't know certain details. And then later on, after they've already developed characters and already gotten us into the storyline of the actual story that we're watching, then episode 8 they decide they're gonna do a flashback. And while I'm shuffling shit around, I think the conversation with Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv should have came before his original confrontation with Will. Like, take out the original confrontation and make their original conversation be the talk that they had when he caught Will trying to sneak out. But like, make that come after the conversation that he had with Aunt Viv. So as it goes for Uncle Phil, like, his first one-on-one conversation we see would be the conversation he had with Aunt Viv. His first conversation with Will is that conversation that they had after he caught Will trying to sneak out, and just completely scrap their first conversation because that was trash. And this might be a little petty. If you're gonna make Carlton a jackass, just dive all the way into it. Like, get a score that makes him sound like a scary movie evil villain type character. You feel me? Like, okay, maybe don't do that. I'm wilding. But like, the shit, it just genuinely blew mine how bad he was. And some other issues I had is like, why did they have Jazz pick him up from the airport? Like, that was just a big middle finger to anyone who actually cares about the original show, and it was unnecessary. Like, they couldn't get Quincy Jones or even Willard Smith to drop him off and throw the thumbs up and dip. Like, that would have been such a refreshing homage to the actual property, but they don't respect the actual property, and stuff like that makes it painfully obvious. Like, why is Jeffrey running around with knots in his pocket just throwing hundreds around? Like, why would they have Will say the fancy chef made a Philly cheesesteak as good as they did in Philly? Why would he say that? And even if it was true, he wouldn't admit it. But the problem is, that's another thing that was like explicitly addressed in The Fresh Prince when he had his homie from Philly come visit him and bring him one. Like, that was something that they already told. And it's like, did y'all actually watch the TV show y'all are remaking? And I don't want to hear shit about, oh, it's a whole different show. Cause then why did you have the characters and the storyline and all that stuff to promote the show if it's a completely different show? Like, at some point you have to acknowledge that they have to stay true to the original in some way, shape, or form. At least the characters, especially if you're gonna give them the same names and general premises to their lives. Like, it was enough dramatic subject matter to make a drama out of The Fresh Prince. But if you wanted to make something different, make something different. And also, in this, I saved this for the end because this is just a theory I have. I feel like whoever made this show hates black men, or maybe just hates men in general. But like, you notice, like, Hilary was a very different character. Like I said, they showed some integrity to Aunt Viv. The whole thing with Ashley kind of took her out of it because early in The Fresh Prince, she was just this naive character and they were trying to follow it kind of beat by beat. So you take Ashley out. Hilary, she was still likable, and although she was a different character and they didn't stay true to her character, her new character was still a likable person. But like, yo, Carlton and Uncle Phil were just horrible. They were the epitome of toxic masculinity in every single way, shape, or form, and every single negative stereotype that someone in their position could be. And I just hated it. I just hated it. And the problem is, like I say, it could have been a good show if they just made it a different show. Make a character like that I hate, that's Carlton, or a character that I really dislike, that's Uncle Phil. But like, don't call them Carlton and Uncle Phil, and make them live in fucking Calabasas or something like that. Like, when you take the story of The Fresh Prince and the characters of The Fresh Prince and you pervert it like this, it's painful. It really broke my heart to watch it. Honestly, like, as somebody who cares about the show, who it mattered to them growing up, it really broke my heart to watch that. And I never want to see anything like that again.
The microphone is my mistress, I air it out, I'm just venting. Fix your mouth like a dentist and you get stopped like a sentence. These niggas pouting and bitching, I'm just counting my Benjamins. Ain't announcing my mission, I just come out with a victory.